is it like when the world of fiction intersects with the world of terrorism and security intelligence? Hi, this is Phil Gurski, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting in Russell, Ontario, Canada. Listen to Canadian Intelligence, a podcast about national security and public safety. As a Canadian, there's something about us that is always struck me as a little bit weird. Canadians have this amazing inferiority complex. Part of it's because we live next door to the United States, and as the first Trudeau Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, used to say, it's like sleeping beside the elephant. Whenever the elephant moves, you tend to feel the after effects. And I think one of the parts of our inferiority complexes as Canadians, aside from the fact we say sorry all the time, is that we look to other nations when it comes to culture, and that includes literature. So when I was a high school student, which, yes, was when dinosaurs still walked the earth, we would take courses in Canadian literature, and there'd be the classics, the Margaret Atwoods of this world and the Robertson Davies and such. But Canadian literature has really come a long way since I was a high school student. And my current favorite author is a Canadian, and his name is Terry Fallis, and he's joined me today for the podcast. Has written a really interesting book that sort of straddles the world between fiction, humor, and national security. So to talk about that particular challenge in writing that, I am pleased as punch to welcome Terry to the podcast. So thanks for being here, Terry.
Phil, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So you've written a lot of books. You've won the Stephen Leacock Award twice, which is Canada's award for humor. Way back at the very, very beginning, Terry, in your very, very first book, so The High Road, you wrote about a member of Parliament, an MP called Angus McClelland, who I think has become maybe one of your all-time favorite characters amongst your readers. Can you walk us through why you chose to put a Scottish-born member of Parliament as the protagonist in your first novel way back in 2008?
Well, that's a good question. I've often asked myself that question, but I think I know how it happened. As a comic novelist, I'm a big fan of fish out of water stories where you drop somebody unexpected in a certain world and watch them flail about and make their way, and usually with some humorous repercussions. Um, when I wanted to write about politics, because I worked in the world of politics very early in my career, and I wanted to write a novel that sort of examined what I think are the problems we have in how we practice politics. But I didn't want to write a rage-filled nonfiction polemic on the state of politics in this country. So,
Oh, there's far too many of those books already on the
well,
market, Terry.
well, I know, and nobody would have published it, and nobody would have read it. So I thought, why don't I cloak my ideas in a funny story and create some characters that readers might come to like and even care about, and at the same time, maybe through stealth, actually have readers think about some of these issues because I would put my thoughts in the minds and mouths of these funny characters. So that was where it came from. And I thought, well, easiest way to do that is to pick someone who is not involved in politics at all and all of a sudden drop them on the floor of the House of Commons as an accidental member of Parliament. And that's kind of what I did with Angus McClelland. You're right, he was a Scottish emigre. He's older, he's in his early 60s, and he's a mechanical engineering professor who is really his own person. He is as honest as the day is long. He has lived by his principles his entire life and will not give them up for anybody. So he does what he thinks is right. And what an unusual kind of person to all of a sudden launch into the world of Canadian politics. And I thought that would be an interesting exercise. Funny along the way, but also an education for Angus and perhaps for the reader as they learn about how politics really works and how Angus kind of rails against that and illuminates a different path we might take simply through his own actions in politics. So that's where it came from. I was creating a fish out of water story and centered it in Canadian politics.
Well, he's a delightful character, and to continue the fish out of water story, of course, there's a hovercraft that's involved in the very first novel you wrote, speeding down the Ottawa River at some point. Now, before my listeners turn off the podcast and think, "What the hell is Gurski doing talking to Terry Fallis about his books? Why? What does this have to do with national security?" Well, you've brought Angus back. And your most recent novel is entitled Operation Angus. It came out this year. It's doing very, very well. As you and I were discussing in the lead up, it's now it's still one of the best sellers in Canada, and rightfully so. It's a brilliant novel, but it's a very different kind of novel that you've written traditionally, Terry. So it still involves Angus and it's just his very honest, blunt self. I love the way he deals with matters in an engineering kind of way. He
Right.
calls us, there's black and white kind of thing. But it also involves national security, and it involves, let's call it what it is, an actual terrorist plot to assassinate some people here in Ottawa. What in heaven's name led you to think that you wanted to write a novel that involved a national security angle? And as somebody that didn't have a background in national security, what were the challenges that you faced in coming up with something plausible?
Well, let me deal with the first part of the question first. Well, I made a calculation. It had been 11 years since I'd written an Angus novel, and the strength of those first two novels, The Best Laid Plans and The High Road, if there is a strength in them, I think it is that they were fish out of water stories, which allows me to have some fun and write some funny lines in there too. But by the time the third novel rolls around, he's hardly a fish out of water anymore. And I wanted to maintain that fish out of water idea with Angus and even extend it to the narrator of the novel, his trusty sidekick, Daniel Addison. So I decided, and while I was centering the novel on Parliament Hill in the world of politics, the story is not really about politics at all. Well, there's a little politics, but you're right. It's about national security. It's about an assassination plot against the life of the Russian president who is coming to visit for a one-day meeting with our prime minister. And I sort of put Angus and Daniel in possession of some intelligence that they had
Mhm.
received from a disgruntled and very principled MI6 operative while they were in London for meetings. But they are really on their own because nobody believes them. Nobody really believed the MI6 officer, which is why she felt the need
Mhm.
to reach out to Angus and Daniel. So there is evidence of an assassination plot to take place in Ottawa against the life of the Russian president. And Angus and Daniel do not have any support from CSIS or the RCMP or any of the law enforcement or intelligence agencies in Canada because they don't believe that there is any evidence to suggest anything untoward is going to happen.
In fact, quite
So
the opposite. They get put the Ministry of Public Safety pushes back vehemently, and part of it's due with the personality clash between
that's right.
a senior official and Angus. But they are given no credence at all when when they say this plot is unfolding, as they've heard from this MI6 officer.
No, that's exactly right. And part of it, you're right, is the minister responsible for national security has a hate on for Angus. I was going to say a feud, but that suggests that it's a two-way street. Angus has no really any feud with with the minister, but because of something that happens towards the tail end of the High Road, the second novel, the minister just hates Angus and will do everything in his power to get in his way and not make his life easy. So Angus and Daniel are on their own. So once again, they are fish out of water.
Right,
They're operating in a
right.
world that they don't know. But there were challenges. I mean, you're right. I didn't spend any time as you have in the intelligence world. My education about intelligence and thriller writing comes from reading Robert Ludlum and Frederick Forsyth and Daniel Silva and Wilbur Smith and other thriller writers. And I'm not a huge thriller reader, but I have written some, and I just thought it would be kind of fun to try and combine my usual humorous approach, but couple that with the high stakes, world hanging in the balance, potential bloodshed and loss of life of a thriller. And that was the challenge. But I did have some help, Phil.
Who in heaven's name, Terry, did you turn to for help in coming up with some of the plot behind Operation Angus?
Well, it's a story I've told often when I'm discussing the book at various, book clubs or literary festivals or libraries and that sort of thing. But as I was in the early stages of planning this novel, mapping it out, because I'm an engineer by academic training, so I need a blueprint before I ever write the
Just like
manuscript.
Angus, the engineer, right?
Exactly, exactly. No, that's not a coincidence. So while I was mapping it out, I got an email from a guy named Phil Gurski.
Oh, I wouldn't trust an email from a guy like that.
Exactly. Well, you had emailed me about getting together in Toronto and chatting about books and writing books and marketing books. And when you explained that you had a long career in the intelligence community, both at CSIS and then even in the Privy Council office, for that matter, I thought to myself, you will definitely sit down for coffee with this guy. And I did. And I hope I didn't jump to my issues, my questions too early in the conversation, because I know we had a chat about things you were interested in talking about. But when that was sort of drawing to a close, I said, well, now that I've got you here, Phil, and I described this novel, and you gave me some really good advice. You shed some light on the inner machinations of intelligence agencies, be it MI6 or the KGB, or I guess they're called the FSB now,
Mhm.
if I have that right, and CSIS and the RCMP, which helped me create the scenario that allowed this story to unfold in a way that I hope at least approaches plausibility, if never quite getting there.
Oh, it very much does, and I do recall that meeting. In fact, it was at I believe it was a Second Cup, or maybe it was a Starbucks
It
right
was a
across the street,
Starbucks.
right
Yeah,
across from Union Station, right in downtown Toronto.
that's
And
right.
I was thrilled because I was meeting somebody whose work I had certainly admired, and it ended up being a mutually beneficial relationship. So I guess we walked away the happier for it.
We did. We did. And the book is the better for your interventions. And actually, it was at that meeting where we decided, the two of us, I think, that the best title would be Operation
Operation.
Angus. I knew I wanted Angus in the title because when you leave one of your characters for 11 years before coming
Mhm,
back to them,
mhm.
you want to signal to the reader who's rushing through their local bookstore that that character is back. So I actually wanted the word Angus in the title, but it was your suggestion to call it Operation Angus, which I loved. That's great.
In all honesty, I don't recall saying that, but
No, you
I
did.
will take credit for it. But no, you're right. When you work in the intelligence business and you're engaged in an investigation, you give it a name, and sometimes the names are often they're randomly selected. Sometimes there's some kind of a rota of words that you can and cannot use. But it fits, and it certainly is. The novel really hangs together. But I do have a question for you, Terry. So the
Yeah.
novel's done very very well, and again, congratulations on that. But surprise, surprise, I knew it was going to do well. Have you had any feedback whatsoever from anyone in Canada or outside of this country who, like myself, worked in law enforcement or security intelligence to say, "Way to go, Terry! You hit out, you're batting 1,000 on this one," or "My God, Terry, did you ever miss the boat on
You
this one?"
missed
Have you
my
had any
head.
kind of feedback in that regard?
No, on on not on either side of that of that divide. No, well, not from anyone in law enforcement. I haven't, other than you. So,
Uh-oh.
or in,
They always
but
say, Terry, in intelligence circles, single source information is always very, very dodgy. You should corroborate from multiple sources.
that's true. I guess that's true. No, I haven't, and I hope when people will read it. I mean, I thought long and hard about what kind of precipitating event to drive the story, and in this novel, and I'm not giving any spoilers because you can read about it on the I think on the back cover of the novel. There's a Chechen separatist sleeper cell, Chechen independent sleeper cell that are in Ottawa, and they have Chechen sleeper cells, according to the novel, in many capitals around
Mhm,
the world because they've been trying to, at least some Chechens have been trying to assassinate President Putin, or in the novel, it's President Podovkin.
mhm.
And they can't get close in Moscow. So
Mhm.
they I think quite rightly figure that he might be an easier target when he's on some of his foreign travels and visiting other heads of state. And this novel is set back in the time when Russia was still a member of the G8. It's set in
Right,
about
right,
2010. Um, because it just follows on from the previous novel directly, which was 11 years ago.
right.
Um, so that was my idea that they'd have these Chechen sleeper cells in Paris and in Madrid and in Ottawa. And Canada was a good choice, I think, because not a lot happens in sort of that would influence the geopolitical balance in our country. We're known as a peace loving people, and so they thought this would be a good place to locate a sleeper cell to be activated when and if the president ever comes to Ottawa. And lo and behold, that's what happens in the novel.
And you may not remember this, Terry, but you're very, very close to what did happen historically in the early 1980s, where we had Armenian terrorists in Ottawa. They assassinated a Turkish diplomat in 1982, and then
Yes.
they attacked the Turkish embassy in 1985, killing a local security guard. And they had sought out Ottawa of all places and the Turkish representation to punish Turkey for the alleged 1916 genocide of the Armenians during World War One.
Right.
So there's a history of that here, and one could argue that the Air India attack of '85 by Sikh terrorists in Canada was also used Canada as what would be seen as a safe ground to plot something. In that case, against the state carrier of Air India back in 1985. So, we may be the sleepy country in some places, and the country of peace loving people, but. As I've written in my most recent book, I mean, it's not that we haven't had terrorism in this country. So
Right.
kudos to you for creating a plot by Chechen extremists. And by the way, there certainly are Chechen terrorists around the world. And surprise, surprise, they're not big fans of Putin, they're not big fans of the Russian Federation for
That's
the
right.
all reasons of invasion and stuff. Now that you've written one, Terry, and I'm not going to ask for any spoiler alert on any kind on the next novel you're working on. Do you see yourself going down this road again? And maybe not an Angus novel. Maybe this would be a 4-part trilogy with Angus.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself maybe engaging at some point in another sort of cloak and dagger kind of novel, or do you tick that box off and you're going to want something? As I've noticed with your other novels, they're all very different from each other. Yeah, is there another angle that Terry Fallis has yet to explore, and we can look forward to in the years to come?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the jury is actually still out on that. I don't actually know if there will be another one. It depends on how this one is received, I guess. But I did enjoy doing it, and you may have noticed at the very end of the novel, I've left the door open for another
Yes,
one
you made
because
Angus the Minister of Public Safety, which is responsible for CSIS, and that's why I'm asking the question. So
yeah,
Angus is
exactly.
now the minister, and I'm thinking, I can
Well,
see, I can smell the smoke coming between Terry's ears here. There's something going on here.
I do like to keep my options open. So it's possible that we might try another one, but it won't be the next novel because I'm already working on it, and it's not an Angus novel. It's a another one about all sorts of different things, largely about male friendship and aging, and there's a bit of music in there, and there's a love story and
But no,
overcoming.
but no terrorism and espionage, though.
No, nothing like that yet. So I'm just recovering from writing the first one. So we'll see. But I did have fun writing it and sort of plotting it out and trying to make it believable. I mean, lots of stuff in my novels are would strain credulity
Right.
as
You
you read
suspend
it.
your disbelief when you read fiction
Yes,
sometimes. Absolutely.
yeah, but you want it to be at least so that it feels like it might happen or it could happen. So I hope I came close to that, and I was uncertain of that because I'd never written anything quite like this one.
Well, no, I think you did succeed. I'm not going to spoil the plot for those who haven't read it. And by the way, Terry didn't pay me to say this, but if you are still looking for stocking stuffers for Christmas this year, I can highly, highly recommend Operation Angus as well as all of Terry's books. So that's your promotion is now over, Terry. I'll end right
Thank you,
there.
thank you.
Do you more of a curiosity question here, and it's you've established yourself as a leading Canadian writer of fiction, and as I said, you've won 2 Stephen Leacock medals. And for those who aren't Canadian, Stephen Leacock was probably the greatest Canadian humorist of all time. I remember reading Stephen Leacock in high school, and he is still one of my favorite Canadian authors. I have all his books on my shelf, and whenever I want to pick me up, I read Stephen Leacock. It's just he's just got that way of writing. He was absolutely brilliant. Is it hard to come up with more and more ideas, or do you find you've got more ideas than you have time?
I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. I think it is hard to come up with ideas, and I don't have 47 ideas I'm deciding among for my next novel. I usually have one idea that comes at great expense and mental exhaustion. But yeah, so there's usually one. The next novel is kind of in the queue, and I have some ideas for that. Often when I am finishing the previous novel. So it's not like I have 2 or 3 novels lined up ready to go. It's never been that easy. But usually the next one in the queue is starting to emerge from the mists in my brain pan. But so I do have a couple of ideas, and maybe Angus might be involved in some of those ideas, but they haven't yet crossed the finish line, as it were. But so we'll see. I've got a few ideas, but not many. I never have many, just a few.
Now, when you and I last met, it was a couple of weeks ago. It was at the Royal York Hotel, right down to iconic Canadian hotel, run on Front Street across from Union, the main train station.
Right?
You walked me through a little bit about kind of what you need to do when you write a novel, and we had this conversation because I confided in you that I was pondering the possibility of writing a fiction for the first time in my life. I think a lot of my listeners might be curious to hear what it is that you need to do. And you say you do have an engineering background,
Yep.
and therefore you've got a certain way of looking at the world. Without betraying too many secrets, can you
Ah,
walk people through what you need to do? What makes you feel comfortable in the sense that you have enough? You have the ideas, and then you craft them, and then before you actually start putting flesh on the bones, what does that process look like for you?
right. Well, I'm glad you put it that way. What do I need? Because I would never suggest that other people adopt my approach to writing. I think one of our challenges, and our first challenge as a writer, I think, first responsibility even, is to figure out how we, as individual writers, write best. And I think some writers who struggle and find writing to be a sort of a miserable process, though they're compelled to do it, may not have figured out yet how they are supposed to write. Because I don't think it has to be a miserable, anxiety-ridden process. So for me, I kind of lucked out. I think I sorted out the main elements of my approach to writing, my writing process, with my first novel. And I've always enjoyed the process. So you're right. I'm an engineer by academic training. I view the world through an engineer's lens. Even though I've never practiced engineering, I certainly feel like I am one. And to me, engineers don't build bridges without blueprints. I don't write a novel without a blueprint. I mean, you can
I
imagine
would
what a,
I would
I
think
mean,
of building a bridge on a blueprint is a really, really bad idea.
exactly. You would not wish to be on a bridge that had been written off the cuff, stream of consciousness, the way some writers approach their novels. And that works for some writers. Some of our finest writers don't know where they're going in their story, and they literally write their way through it. So I am in no way denigrating how others write because it works for them. But for me, uncertainty is the enemy of my writing. I just can't write if I don't know where the story's going and what's going to happen in the end. So I think the whole thing through. If it takes me 18 months to write a novel, I'm not writing complete sentences in the manuscript until the last 4 months of that process. So
Wow.
I am not one of those people who writes every day, that writer's axiom, write every day,
Mhm.
unless you consider writing to be, thinking about the story, mapping out the plot, deciding on the characters. So I do all of that first. I develop a chapter map. I know the arc of the story at that stage, generally what happens. Then I sort of plot it on a grid so I know how my chapters are going to sort of be divided and what plot points are happening in each chapter box there. And then I blow that chapter map out into a complete chapter by chapter bullet point version of the novel. That's my outline. And that ends up being 80 or 90 pages. So I still
Wow.
haven't written the first word in the manuscript, but I have a 90-page chapter by chapter bullet point version of the novel to guide me when I do start the manuscript. And what that means is I know the story backwards and forwards. I've sorted out all the plot issues. There's nothing, no element of uncertainty in the story at all. And I put that outline on one side of my screen and I put the manuscript on the other side, and I start writing. And I can do a 100,000 word manuscript in about 4 months of weekends, which I know seems fast, but it's really not fast when you realize how much I know about the story. I'm just writing it. I know the
Mm.
story. I just have to write it now. So that's how I do it. So I'm an inveterate planner, more so than any other writers I know. So it's the process that works for me. And if writers are struggling and are miserable and not making any headway or progress on their manuscript, and they've never tried outlining before, it's at least worth a try.
Well, Terry, clearly it works. I mean, you've written 8 novels to date. They've all done very well. As I said, you have definitely become maybe not my favorite author. I'm still partial to Stephen Leacock,
There
but
you go. I'm
but
in
you've
good company.
well, absolutely. You know your novels are they're compelling, they're interesting, they're hard to put down, they're well written. I love the fact that you've injected humor even as something as serious as national security. So congratulations to you for becoming the author that you have. I'm looking very much forward to any other offerings that you will bestow upon us here in Canada and internationally. And lastly, thanks for coming on the podcast to share a bit of who you are and how you do things, and what a guy, an engineer from Toronto, was doing, writing a book about international security and terrorism. I do
Who knew?
appreciate who knew, right? But thanks very much for coming on the podcast, Terry.
Phil, thanks for having me. It's been great. And thanks for all your help to that, making that novel happen.
Well, if you ever go down that pathway again, you know where to find me. We can go to that Starbucks across from Union Station and hash out a new international spy thriller by Terry Fallis.
There you go. That would be great. Thank you.
So that was my conversation with award-winning Canadian novelist Terry Fallis. You can find his books. He's got his webpage. I highly recommend them. What do you think about our conversation? Are you a budding author that's looking at writing about international security or terrorism or spies? Love to hear what you think of this podcast. You can reach me on email, borealisrisk@gmail.com, or on Twitter @BorealisSaves. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. If you like the content and want to subscribe, go to the website, borealisthreatandrisk.com. Hit the subscribe button. You get a free daily digest of all the podcasts, all the blogs, as well as a link to my latest book, The Peaceable Kingdom, A History of Terrorism in Canada, from Confederation to the Present. You can only buy it off the website. Love to hear your feedback, maybe some ideas for other podcasts. I'll talk to you again soon. Until then, stay safe.